world does a boat float?
How in the world does a light bulb work?
How in the world does a bird fly? Where in the world is the deepest spot in the ocean? Why in the world is the sky blue? Where in the world are the 7 ancient wonders?
Where in the world are the northern lights?
How in the world does the moon affect the tides?
How in the world does an electoral college work?
How in the world do bits and bytes work on the computer? How in the world do fish breathe? How in the world does a bridge work?
Hey there, fellow adventurers and inquisitive ones. Welcome aboard the Airship Curiosity. I'm pilot Lindy, and my companions and I are ready to take you around the world to show you how in the world. And you don't have to leave home to do so. You have questions, and we know just where to find the answers. So, do we want to begin our adventure? Well, that's an interesting sound. Of course, following that sound is a great question.
What in the world is an estuary?
What a great question. There are more than a dozen estuaries in the United States alone, and they play an important role in our environment. Let's go plunge into an explanation. To discover just what makes up an estuary, the Airship Curiosity finds itself hitting the air brakes over Nauticus, an exciting interactive science and technology center in downtown Norfolk, Virginia. Dedicated to exploration of the sea, Nauticus is also home to the battleship Wisconsin. In addition, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, has an outreach office there.
We're a science agency, and so we're trying to observe and predict and monitor the Earth, especially the oceans and atmosphere.
So this seems like the perfect place to ask, what is an estuary?
Well, an estuary is just really a body of water that's partly enclosed where rivers meet the sea. So it's a mixing of salt and fresh water, and they're pretty special places.
And Nauticus sits at the edge of the largest estuary in the United States, the Chesapeake Bay. The bay is 200 miles long and is fed fresh water from thousands of tributaries and rivers and salt water from the Atlantic Ocean. A tributary is a stream or river flowing into a larger river or into a lake or even an estuary.
With this mixing that we get of the fresh and the salt water, the tides mix it together, and we end up with a pretty good area for plants and animals to grow. There's a huge number of species that live in estuaries and don't live other places.
These would be different kinds of waterfowl, fish, and shellfish like oysters and crabs. The bay is a great nursery area for young fish, and it also provides jobs for people.
Jobs depend on estuaries. In our area, there's a lot of folks that either are fishing commercially or just sports fishermen. A lot of money goes into those two areas. Also nature tourism. And finally, things like the Port of Virginia are located in estuaries because they're protected from the storm. So it's not just about the plants and the animals. Humans depend on estuaries as well.
But as magnificent as the bay is, it is narrow and shallow, so it's easy for pollution to become an environmental problem.
And one of the things impacting estuaries is the loss of wetlands, these areas, these marshlands that we have right up against the shoreline. So we can do a lot of things to try to protect wetlands.
An important resident of the bay is the oyster. Some people love their taste, but oysters also help keep the bay clean.
Oysters, they filter the water. It used to be back in John Smith's time that oysters could filter the entire water of the bay in just 3 or 4 days. Now it takes probably about a year for the oysters to filter that same amount of water. So they're taking the bad stuff out of the water. That's a good thing. The other thing is the oysters, they build reefs on top of each other, so they make habitat or places to live for fish and a variety of other species.
So, estuaries, a place that provides jobs for people? A home for fish, crabs, oysters, and the like? A place where ships bring us Xboxes, sneakers, and bikes? Or a major piece of the puzzle?
It's right in the middle. It's that piece that you really need to be able to complete the puzzle because it's the buffer area between the rivers and the ocean, and so a lot of pollution is filtered out in those estuaries. It's also where humans interact. A lot of people don't have the opportunity to go out in the blue ocean, out in the deep ocean, but they can go to the edge of the shore, and a lot of times when you're talking about the edge of the shoreline, you're talking about an estuary.
Did you know that you can help protect estuaries right in your own house? Around the house, keep litter, pet waste, leaves, and grass clippings out of street gutters and storm drains to prevent them from entering into streams that may flow into estuaries. Never dump any household, automotive, or gardening waste into a storm drain. Those might also end up in an estuary. So see, a few simple steps can help a lot. Now that sounds like another question.
How in the world did Native Americans build canoes?
Well, since there were estuaries as well as lakes, rivers, and streams, the Native Americans had to get around somehow. So they developed a way to build canoes using materials that they could find easily. But why talk about it? Let's go take a look. To uncover this answer, the Airship Curiosity has set sail for a very historic place, Yorktown, Virginia. It was here in Yorktown on the banks of the York River in October 1781, where French and American forces laid siege to the British Army under General Charles Cornwallis. After 2 weeks of bombardment, the British Army surrendered, effectively ending the Revolutionary War. But Yorktown has always been bound to the river. Well before the War for Independence, Native Americans populated its banks, using the river for food and for travel. Along those same banks is a museum with a mission to interpret the history and culture of the watermen of the Chesapeake Bay. Standing in the shadows of the Coleman Bridge, the museum covers everything from environmental science to the history of the area, a history that is not as exact as would be desired.
The problem with Native American cultures, it's all based oral history. They have nothing written down.
However, some of the colonists provided wonderful paintings of the surroundings, giving us a picture of how canoes are put together.
Very wide and flat on the bottom, so they're a very stable work platform. Yeah, we're told that cypress is preferred wood over any of the harder woods. First off, it's easier to work, and it also is full of natural oils. It doesn't rot. Secondly, it grows by the water, it grows fast, it grows large, so you can bring it down. And once you keep cypress wood wet, essentially, it doesn't rot anymore.
But the museum allows visitors to take history into their own two hands. These students are working on their own dugout canoe. A dugout, or dugout canoe, is a boat made from a hollowed tree trunk. Dugouts are the oldest boats archaeologists have found, dating back about 8,000 years. Creating one from a log was no easy task.
And they have no metal tools until the Europeans arrived. So again, the descriptions are they're using fire to do most of the shaping. So you pick your tree, you build your fire around the base, and then burn it down.
Fire is how the canoe was shaped. Fire would be used to burn the exterior, so there would be a flat surface for the bottom. A fire is used to burn the log to whatever length is wanted. Once all of that is done, the log is turned over and the hollowing process begins.
Because the question we always get is, why doesn't the log just burn up? We say, well, it's controlled burning.
Small fires burn for a little bit, then the fire is moved. They used simple hand tools like shells and stone scrapers that actually remove the charcoal. What is left behind is a fire-hardened surface, which is much better than you would ever get with a metal tool like a chopping or chipping blade. Burn and scrape, burn and scrape. It is imagined that the early Native Americans had several fires going on at the same time and a handful of people working. So how long would it take the villagers to create a new canoe?
I figure about a week, maybe 2. The village works on it, or it's a family project. Is it just the men, not the women? We really don't know, because the English don't ask those sort of questions historically. We know that typically the Algonquin culture here on the Tidewater region is very, very gender specific. The women do their jobs, men do their jobs. So maybe the women aren't involved in canoe making because that's what the men do. They fish and they hunt and they go out fighting all the time. But it's also the family vehicle. You want to visit your cousins down the river, you have to hop in the canoe and go, because there's no way to go across all the neck of lands through the swamps. It would take forever.
And as the author Henry David Thoreau said, everyone must believe in something. I believe I'll go canoeing. Naturally, European settlers copied the canoe's design and looked for different ways and materials to build their own. And though they have evolved over the years, they still maintain a basic design. Now we're going to take a break when we set sail for more cool discoveries.
Some more.
What's he doing?
Please, sir, I want some more.
More? He has asked for more!
Thank you.
Well, he did say please. Yes, he did. And thank you.
Please, and thank you. Pass it on.
Hey, Travis.
Get some friends, loser.
Bro, you alright, man?
Lean on me
Thanks.
when you're not strong, and I'll be
Character.
your friend.
Pass it on.
I'll help you carry
A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
And now, another How in the World brain game.
Do you think it's possible to stab a potato with a drinking straw? Let's find out. You won't need much, just some stiff plastic drinking straws and a raw potato. Hold a plastic drinking straw by its sides, then try quickly stabbing the potato. What happens? Not much. Now let's repeat it trying a new straw, but this time place your thumb over the top, covering the hole. Now what's happening? Placing your thumb over the hole at the top of the straw improves your ability to pierce the potato skin and push the straw deep into the potato. The first time you tried the experiment, you may have only pierced the potato a small amount. So why are you more successful on the second attempt? Covering the top of the straw with your thumb traps the air inside, forcing it to compress as you stab the straw through the potato skin. This makes the straw strong enough to pierce the potato. And that shows you how air pressure can be used in surprising ways. Welcome back, fellow explorers. So far we have explored estuaries, Native American canoes, so question time.
What in the world are literary devices and how do writers use them?
If I were to say something to you like, the Wicked Witch of the West went her own way, or he is like a mouse in front of the teacher, those are just two forms of dozens of literary devices. So let's go back to look for more. Oh, those were examples of alliteration and simile. Let's find some more. To tackle this one, we have steered the Airship Curiosity to Richmond, Virginia, home to a museum dedicated to one of America's most accomplished and mysterious authors, Edgar Allan Poe. Each year, more than 20,000 people from all 50 states and around the world visit the Museum of Edgar Allan Poe. Here they can see one of the largest collections of Poe memorabilia in the world and learn more about the man and the city of Richmond in Poe's time.
Edgar Allan Poe was born in 1809, the same year as Abraham Lincoln, and he was America's first internationally influential author. Poe's a little bit misunderstood. People in his own time didn't really understand what was going on with him. They thought he was mad, bad, and dangerous to know, a wild character, but they didn't realize that he was actually feeding his biographers some of that information. He liked the bad reputation.
Poe was a poet and a short story writer. He invented the detective story and was one of the first science fiction writers. He also wrote tales of psychological terror, but primarily he was considered a poet.
Poe called poetry the rhythmic creation of beauty. And he thought the whole purpose of a poem was to be beautiful and not to teach you anything or make you a better person. So he had to focus on the beauty of the poem, on the sounds of it. He was writing poetry that should be read out loud.
And he traveled the country to read those poems out loud. 2,000 people or more might show up to hear him read two of his most well-known works, Telltale Heart and, of course, The Raven.
And he said he almost wrote it backwards. He started with the effect he wanted to achieve. He thought it was very important that he had what he called a unified effect, this impact he would have on the reader's emotions.
In order to achieve his desired effect, Poe relied on a number of literary devices to craft the Raven. A literary device is a written or spoken technique that produces a specific effect, style, or plot mechanism. Poe was a master of combining any number of literary devices, and the Raven contains quite a few. Let's listen.
Once, upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary.
That first famous line features the literary device rhyme. See the words dreary and weary?
Over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore. While I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping.
This line, while I nodded nearly napping, is an example of alliteration, a literary device where words are used in quick succession and begin with letters belonging to the same sound group. The word tapping is a good use of the device onomatopoeia. That refers to words whose sound is very close to the sound that they are meant to depict.
As of someone gently rapping at my chamber door.
See? Plus, the use of words back to back is a device known as repetition.
Ah, distinctly I remember it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow, for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here forevermore.
That was a stanza or verse or paragraph in the poem. The Raven has 18 stanzas, and each one ends with a word that rhymes with nevermore.
And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before.
These two lines show the use of two more devices. The sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain is an example of personification, one of the most commonly used devices. This refers to attaching human traits and characteristics to objects and animals. The rustling of the curtains sounds as if the curtains share the misery of the narrator. This line is an example of assonance, which refers to repetition of sounds produced by vowels within a sentence or phrase. It is similar to alliteration, but it is the repetition of vowel sounds like the E in each of these four words.
So that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor, entreating entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor, entreating entrance at my chamber door. That it is, and nothing more."
So it's very important when you read Poe's poems to read them out loud or to hear somebody else read them, especially somebody who's really accomplished at reading poetry. You can start to get a feel of what Poe is going for. And people who actually saw and heard him perform said he almost sang his poetry.
The Raven is an example of dozens of literary devices that authors use. But will we examine them all in the short time we have left? Quoth the Raven, nevermore.
Later publications of The Raven included artwork by well-known illustrators. Among those, John Tenniel, the illustrator of the original Alice in Wonderland. We've just found another question.
How in the world do windmills work?
Windmills are so closely associated with the Netherlands that often they are the first fact that people recall about the country. But the truth is, the U.S. has quite a history with them as well.
At first you might think that we would have to travel overseas to Holland perhaps to find out about windmills, but we are actually in historic Yorktown, Virginia to look at these marvels. You see, in colonial times, windmills dotted the riverfronts. In fact,
mills in general, at one point, there had to be one mill in each county in Virginia. That was a rule. And the windmill and the water mill and the tide mill and the dreaded tread mill all were responsible for grinding corn to create flour.
The Yorktown windmill was based upon pictures that showed relevant 17th and 18th century buildings in the town. One of those was a windmill. Built in 1711 by William Buckner,
The Yorktown Windmill was a guidepost along the York River for nearly 2 centuries. The original location was on a bluff just above where the current windmill sits. There are 3 types of windmills found in the United States. The first is a post windmill. In a post windmill, the whole building turns on a post so that it can face into the wind. Unless a windmill is facing into the wind, it's not going to work. The second type is a tower windmill, which is made out of stone. These mark the first time that windmills got completely round and much taller. The third type is what was built in Yorktown, a smock windmill. A smock windmill is called that because it looks like an apron coming down. On a smock windmill, only the top of it turns into the rim, with a tail pole that usually runs down to the ground. The Yorktown windmill is based on designs of like mills in New England and is the only smock mill in Virginia. A team of volunteers researched engineering and historic building records and built this one from the gears up.
Very accurately done from those drawings to have what is very representative of what would have been here in 1711.
Construction began in spring of 2008 when volunteers began building the gears, and that all begins with teeth.
There are 2 types of teeth here. The first one is from the brake wheel. Now, this tooth, the one thing that you'll notice about these is that they're removable. Teeth wear. When you get inside and the windmill's grinding against each other and all the things are grinding together, yes, you wax it and you put whatever lubricant you can on it, but that wood is going to wear. By using removable teeth, the millwrights could maintain this huge body. The brake wheel weighs 800 pounds, so they could leave that up there and just go in and replace a tooth when it broke. Same thing with this one. This one comes from what we call the spur wheel. And this tooth is detachable, it's screwed in, so if a tooth wears too much, you can take it out and replace it. And sometimes you have flaws in the wood and a tooth will break.
There are more than 150 teeth in the windmill. A third component is the lanyard pinion, which has a number of smooth shafts. This gear wears very evenly, so that means if one is wearing, they all are. And instead of replacing the shaft, you would replace the entire gear at once. So how does all this lead to grinding grain?
They've got a set of stones inside of them. On the bottom, you have a bed stone, which doesn't move. And on the top, you have a runner stone, which turns. And when it turns, the teeth that are cut into the stone grind together to turn the corn into flour. And corn was a generic term too, because corn could be wheat, barley, anything that you would grow and grind into flour.
It all worked with wind power. The sails would be covered with fabric, the tail pole would be used to turn the windmill into the wind, and Mother Nature took care of the rest. And windmills are responsible for some everyday phrases we hear, like, keep your nose to the grindstone. Of course, we know it means to apply yourself to your work, but it comes from the habit of millers who checked that the stones used for grinding weren't overheating by putting their nose to the stone in order to smell any burning. If the grain caught fire, the entire windmill could be destroyed. Or how about put your shoulder to the wheel? That's where the miller used his shoulder to guide the tail pole around to place the sails into the wind. Again, it means to stick to your work.
Do you think wind power is a thing of the past? Not likely. Wind turbines are generating electricity in 37 states, and developers and utility companies are looking to establish wind farms off the coast. With that, we need to blow on out of here, so until the next time, keep looking up for the Airship Curiosity. When you see us, maybe we'll have an answer or two for you. You know, cool stuff like, why in the world does the Mona Lisa have no eyebrows? How in the world does a digital camera work?